The seventh door closed in my face before I had finished speaking. I stood in the snow outside it, my cloak deliberately threadbare, my right leg wrapped in old linen and dragging a careful limp, and listened to the bolt slide home. Behind the door, a woman's voice said something low and quick to someone inside, and a child laughed, and then the hearthlight went out under the gap at the threshold, as if extinguishing itself were a language even a beggar could understand. I had been on the road for 3 days, not because I was lost, not because my horse had thrown a shoe or my escort had fallen ill. I had dismissed the escort myself, stabled my horse at the eastern garrison without my seal on the order, and walked down into Caldenmere in a cloak I had borrowed from one of the garrison's groundskeepers, a man who owed me nothing and would not remember the exchange. I had come because Warren, my pack steward for the Southern Territories, had brought me a letter. In it, 2 merchants described a winter in Caldenmere that had stripped the village to its bones. The river harvest had failed. 3 families had lost their roof trees to a late autumn storm. A healer had left in the first frost and not been replaced. But Warren's follow-up report, the one he had submitted quietly to my chancellor without telling me, said the village elder had distributed the emergency stores I had sent down from Ashenvorn, and had distributed them selectively, to his own blood, to the inn family who kept the gate ledger, to the pack steward's cousins. I had read that second report twice. Then I folded it and went to find a groundskeeper's cloak. I am the Alpha King of Ashenvorn. I have sat the stone throne since I was 23. I know what a territory looks like when it serves its king, and I know what it looks like when it serves itself, and uses my name as the seal on the arrangement. What I did not know, standing outside the 7th closed door in Caldenmere, was how deep it went. I turned from the door and looked up the lane. The village was not large. 14 houses on the main lane, 3 more on the track that bent toward the river, a cooperage, an inn, a small elder hall that had gone dark 2 hours ago. I had tried the inn first. The keeper, a wide, ruddy man I would remember, had told me his rooms were full without checking his board, without hesitating, without the small, sorry grimace that true regret makes in a man's face. He stepped back and closed the door with his foot. I stood in the doorway smelling the empty rooms behind him, because a wolf always knows the smell of empty rooms, and his were full of nothing but cold air. After that I had tried the other houses in order. The gatekeeper's wife, who told me to try the elder hall, which was locked. The cooperage, which had light in its windows and ignored my knock. 4 more doors, 4 more answers that were not answers. A shake of the head, a hand gesture toward the lane, a woman who said through the wood that they were sick, please go away, and was lying about the sick part. The 7th door, the extinguished light. I stood in the lane and let the snow come down. I had not expected warmth everywhere. Caldenmere was a hard winter village, short on stores, shorter on patience, and I was a stranger. I understood the closed doors. What I was looking for was rarer than an open one. The shape of a person's character when they believed no one who mattered was watching. The closed doors had already told me something. The village had learned that charity was optional, that the weaker claim could be turned away in favor of saving the last log on the grate for the family already inside. I was looking for one door that was different. The lane curved left at the cooperage, and the track toward the river bent away from it at a shallow angle. I had not gone down to the river track yet. 3 houses there, none of them with a light showing, but as I stood in the snow, I saw something move in the dark at the track's far end. A figure, small, carrying what looked like a bundle of sticks against her hip, moving up the track toward the lane, at a pace that meant she had been working. She did not see me until she was nearly at the lane's edge. When she did, she stopped. Not with alarm. She stopped the way a person stops when they are calculating, not frightened. She looked at me steadily for a moment. The limp, the cloak, the fact that I was standing in the snow alone at an hour when no one was standing in the snow alone unless something had gone wrong. She said, "Are you hurt?" I said, "My leg. And I have been turned away from the inn." She looked at the inn. Then she looked back at me. She shifted the bundle of sticks on her hip. "Come then," she said, and turned back down the river track without another word, and I followed her. Her name, I learned over the next hour, was Fen. She told it to me simply, without asking mine, not because she was incurious, I thought, but because she had decided it did not matter yet. What mattered at that moment was getting the fire built up, and the snow off my cloak, and the linen unwrapped from my leg, so she could look at it properly. I had wrapped the leg myself. I had done it well, in the manner of a man who had learned field dressing in worse conditions than a garrison stable, and I had constructed a careful bruise with the back of a stone I had found on the road. Not enough to truly injure, enough to be convincing under examination. She unwrapped the linen, looked at the bruise, pressed 2 fingers to the edge of it, with a directness I recognized from healers who had no time for ceremony, and said, "You walked on this? For 3 days. That was foolish," she said, and went to the shelf beside the hearth where she kept her herbs. The cottage was small, 1 room, divided by a low curtain, the hearth and the work table on one side, the sleeping area on the other. The bed I could see through a gap in the curtain was a good bed, properly framed, with a weight of woven blankets that meant she had not sold them. The fire she had just built was catching. A clay pot hung from the iron hook above it, and she had added something from a pouch to the water in it, before she sat down to unwrap my leg, so the room was already beginning to smell of something warm and green. I looked around the room while she worked. There was a second pallet near the far wall, rolled and bound. Not a second residence, I judged, but a spare, a shelf of jars, a pair of good boots by the door, carefully maintained, a small wooden carving on the windowsill that was either a wolf or a dog, worn smooth from handling, a single candle burning on the table, and a second one unlit beside it. She kept only what she needed, but she kept it well. She wrapped my leg with a poultice that smelled of something I did not know the name of, and when she was finished, she straightened and said, "You should not walk on it again until morning." "I know," I said. "Where were you going?" I had not decided. She looked at me for a moment, with the expression of someone who has decided that whatever I was not dangerous, and had moved past that to something more interesting, a mild, assessing patience. Then she stood, went to the curtain and pulled it back. "Sleep there," she said, nodding at the bed. "I'll take the pallet." I said, "I will not take your bed." She said, "You will sleep on a bed, or you will sleep on the floor. And if you sleep on the floor, I will have to hear it in the morning when that leg stiffens. The pallet suits me well enough." She did not frame it as a question, and she did not wait for my argument. She went to the corner, unrolled the pallet, and settled herself on it with the ease of a person who had slept in worse conditions and was content. That was the end of the argument. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the fire and the snow against the window, and something shifted in me that I did not immediately recognize, because it had not happened in a long time. A loosening, as if something I had been holding carefully in place without knowing I was holding it, had simply let go. I lay down. She had already banked the fire before she lay down herself, so the cottage was warm in the way that matters, the heat settling into the walls and staying there, and the snow outside made no sound at all. I lay in the dark and listened to her breathe and to the fire, and thought that I had not slept like this in years. Not well, not in a room where the weight on the air was simply rest. I did not understand it yet. I thought I was tired. I woke before dawn. She was already at the hearth, adding wood with the careful economy of someone who knows how much is left and has already calculated tomorrow. The pot was back on the hook, the candle was lit. She had her back to me and did not hear me wake, and I watched her for a moment in the firelight, the line of her back, the steady movement of her hands, the way she did not hurry anything, and understood what I had not understood when I fell asleep. The wolf in me had been still all night, not quiet, still. The specific, settled stillness that my wolf achieved only in the presence of something it recognized as right. I had felt that stillness once before in my life, very briefly, at the edge of a river ford. 5 years ago, with a woman who had been killed in the pack war before I could reach her. My wolf had gone into a kind of silence after that, a patient silence, and I had thought it was grief. I had carried it as grief for 5 years. It was not grief. I understood that now, watching Fen build the morning fire. It was waiting. I sat up. She heard the blanket move and looked over her shoulder, and her face in the firelight was simply present, not startled, not performing surprise, simply registering that I was awake and that the morning had therefore started. "Broth," she said, and turned back to the fire. I came to the table and sat, and she brought me a cup of something that was broth in the honest sense. Not elaborate, not flavored for a feast, but made with care, with the bones boiled long and a green thing added late that gave it a clean edge. I drank it. She sat across from me and held her own cup in both hands and looked at the fire. After a while, she said, The inn was full. It was not a question. It was an observation in the tone of someone who had seen the inn's habits before. I said, "He said so." She turned her cup in her hands. "He says so to people who do not have housemarks on their cloaks. He said so to an old man in early frost month who slept in the cooperage and woke with fever. He said so to a family from the eastern ridge last winter who walked 6 hours in the snow." She looked at the fire, not at me, and her voice was not angry. It was the tone of someone stating the shape of a thing she has decided to see clearly. "The village elder decides who gets warm," she said. "The innkeeper decides who sleeps. They have been deciding together since the stores came down." I looked at her. She met my eyes then, briefly, and something in her face told me she knew she had said something that sounded like a complaint, and had decided that calling a thing by its name was not a complaint, it was precision. "I do not know who you are," she said. "I expect you will tell me or you will not. But the leg that you walked 3 days on is not an injury. A poor traveler usually takes the time to wrap so well." She looked at my hands, briefly. "And those are not a poor traveler's hands." I set the cup down. "No," I said. "They are not." She waited. She was very good at waiting. Not the patient waiting of someone suppressing curiosity, but the easy waiting of someone who has understood that a thing will arrive in its own time, and that hurrying it does not shorten the distance. I reached into the inner pocket of the groundskeeper's cloak and brought out the thing I had kept there for 3 days without using. A small disc of dark iron, half the size of my palm, stamped on one face with the wolf and the crown that was the seal of Ashenvorn's throne. I set it on the table between us. She looked at it. She did not reach for it. She looked at it for a long moment with that assessing calm, and then she looked at me, and whatever she had already half decided, resolved in her face into certainty. "The Alpha King of Ashenvorn," she said. "Yes. And the leg. A careful bruise and a bought limp. I apologize for the deception." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" It was the right question. Not "what are you doing here," or "how did you get past the garrison," or "what does the king want in my house at dawn?" Why? I said, "Because I read a report that told me my stores had been given selectively to houses with blood ties to the village elder, and I needed to know the shape of it. Not from another report. From a night in the village." She turned her cup in her hands again. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the first gray light was coming through the window above the shelf of jars, and the wooden carving on the windowsill, the wolf or the dog, worn smooth, caught that light on its highest edge. 7 doors, I said, 8, counting the inn. She said nothing. The cooperage had light in its windows when I knocked. The family on the track above yours turned the hearth light out. I looked at the seal on the table between us. "You were carrying firewood in the dark." "I had been to the Aldrich widow's house," she said. "She is old and her woodstack is low. She will not ask, so I go before she needs to." She said it the way she had said everything, without decoration, as a fact. I looked at her face in the gray morning light. She was not young in the way the word is sometimes used to mean uncertain or unformed. She was young in the way that meant she had her whole life ahead of her, and she knew it, and was not in a hurry about it. She was calm in a way I had not seen in a long time. Not the calm of someone who has given up on things, the calm of someone who has decided what matters and does those things without waiting for approval. I felt it again, the stillness in my wolf. Not a surge, not a pull, a settling. The way a door fits into its frame when the wood has been properly shaped. "I did not know I was giving you a bed," she said after a moment. I knew you were a stranger. I did not know you were the king." She looked at me. "Would it have been different if I had known?" "For you? For you?" she said. Whether the test was honest. That stopped me. I thought about it honestly, because the question deserved it. "No," I said. "I was looking for what a person does when they believe no one who matters is watching." "You believed no one who mattered was watching." "I still believe that," she said quietly. "Whatever your seal says, you were a man who was cold." Something moved in my chest. Not my wolf. That was already settled. This was something older than my wolf. Some part of me that had been sitting in a cold hall for 5 years waiting for a room that felt inhabited. "Fen," I said. She looked at me. "I came here to read the shape of a village," I said. I did not expect to find anything else. I turned the iron seal over on the table, once, and left it face down. My wolf has been still since I fell asleep. It has not been still like this in 5 years. She looked at the seal, then at me. Her face did not change. That was what I noticed. It did not perform surprise or excitement or calculation. It simply waited, fully present, while she decided what she thought. "What does that mean?" she said, carefully. "For a wolf." "It means," I said, "that he has found what he was waiting for." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the gray light was warming, and somewhere at the top of the lane a door opened. Someone beginning their morning, unaware that the morning had already changed shape down here by the river track. I waited for her face to show fear, or ambition, or the specific gratitude that is its own kind of distance. It showed none of those things. It showed thought. "I am not a pack woman," she said finally. "I have no house name. My mother came from the eastern ridge with no wolf of her own, and my father was a river trader who passed through." She looked at the fire. "I am not what a king's mate is supposed to be." "No," I said, "you are what she is." She looked at me. "My court has spent 3 years telling me what a king's mate is supposed to be," I said. "Name, bloodline, standing, ceremony. I have sat in the stone hall and listened to all of it. I looked at my hands, the hands she had identified, calmly, by the firelight. Last night I slept better than I have slept in 5 years. In a cottage on a river track, with a woman I had known for an hour, who gave me her bed because I was cold. I looked at her. I am not interested in what she is supposed to be." She turned her cup once more. Then she set it down with a small, deliberate sound, and spread her hands flat on the table, and looked at them. I saw it then, on her left wrist, where the sleeve had pulled back. A mark. Not a burn, not a bruise. A mark the color of deep water at dawn, shaped like no birthmark I had ever seen, shaped instead like the interlocked wolf and moon that the old seers called the bond seal. I had one on my own right wrist. I had had it since I was 17. My chancellor had called it a rarity, a king's mark, and said the old lore held that it would blaze when the fated mate was near. It was blazing now. A low, steady light, like a coal that has been waiting for breath. She had not noticed, or she had noticed and had not named it. "Your wrist," I said. She looked down. She went still. She turned her wrist slowly and looked at the mark, and her face did something quiet and complicated. A recognition, I thought, of something she had had for so long, she had stopped asking what it was. "I have had this since I was a girl," she said. "My mother said it was a river mark, that the water sometimes leaves marks on children born near it." "It is not a river mark," I said. She looked up at me. I turned my own wrist and showed her the right side. The same mark, the same deep color, the same shape, and blazing now with the same quiet light, so that across the table from each other in the gray morning, we were the only 2 lit things in the room. She looked at them for a long time, at mine, at hers, at mine again. "The bond seal," she said, and it was not a question. She knew the old lore. She was, at her heart, a healer's daughter, and healer's daughters learn the old lore. "Yes," I said. She sat with that for a moment. I did not press her. I had learned something, across the night and the morning in this cottage, about the pace at which Fen made her decisions, not fast, not slow, but her own, arrived at by a process I could not rush and would not have wanted to. She thought with her whole self, quietly and completely, and when she arrived somewhere, she arrived there with certainty. "If I say yes," she said, at last, "I am not saying it because you are a king. I want you to know that." "I know that," I said. "I am saying it because—" She stopped, tried again. "Because you were cold," she said, simply, "and I did not want you to be cold. And because my wrist has had that mark my whole life and I have been waiting, I think I have been waiting, without knowing the name of it, for what it meant." She looked at the marks. "And because you slept." I smiled then. I had not smiled in the way that comes without choosing to. I had not smiled like that in 5 years. "I slept," I said. "Whatever the bond is," she said, "or whatever the court says, or whatever a king's mate is supposed to be, you slept in my house, and I was not afraid of you." And my wrist lit up like it knew something I hadn't caught up to yet. She looked at me. "That seems like enough to start with." It was. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. I reached across the table and took her hand, the left one, the marked one, and held it. She did not pull away. She turned her hand once so that our marks were pressed together, wrist to wrist, and the light between them bloomed warm and even, the way a fire blooms when you have finally added the right piece of wood, and the cottage was very quiet, and outside the gray light had turned gold. We sat like that for a while. Then she said, "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "I go back to Ashenvorn, and I deal with a village elder and an innkeeper who have been stealing from their people in my name, and I send a proper healer to Caldenmere, and I fix what is broken. And the old Aldrich widow's woodstack," she said. I looked at her. "She will not ask," she said. "Someone has to go without being asked." "Yes," I said, "someone will go." She nodded, satisfied with that. She turned her cup in her free hand, and after the fixing, she said, "What then?" "Then," I said, "I would like to come back to this river track, if you are willing." She looked at the seal on the table, still face down, and at the marks on our wrists. She looked at the fire she had built this morning from the wood she had gone out in the dark to gather for herself, and for an old woman down the lane who would not ask. She looked at the carving on the windowsill. "I am willing," she said. I turned the seal right side up. Within the hour, the word had reached the lane. I had not hidden it. When I walked up from the river track to the inn, I walked without the limp, in the groundskeeper's cloak with the iron seal in my open hand, and the pack steward who had come down from the elder hall to investigate the stranger who had been seen leaving the Fen woman's cottage, stopped on the lane and went very white and said something that was not a word. The innkeeper came to his door. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the seal. He looked at Fen, who had come up the track behind me, not at my heel, not performing anything, simply walking at her own pace, in her own boots, with her herb bag on her shoulder, because she had said she had to check on the Aldrich widow before she did anything else, and she was not going to let the king's arrival change her morning route. The innkeeper said, "My lord." "Don't," I said, not loudly. It did not need to be loud. He was quiet. The cooperage door had opened. 3 more doors on the lane. People coming out with the careful, slow movement of people who are calculating whether to be present or to stay inside, and deciding, correctly, that staying inside was worse. I said, to the pack steward, and to the innkeeper, and to the lane in general, "I will be sending an accounting officer from Ashenvorn within the week. Every house in Caldenmere will be surveyed, every store logged, every distribution record examined against the ledger I sent down with the winter allocation." I paused. "I expect the records to be complete. I expect them to be accurate. If they are not, I expect you to understand what follows." The pack steward nodded. He had the look of a man doing arithmetic and not enjoying the results. I looked at the innkeeper. He looked at Fen. I watched him understand, and I saw the moment he understood not just that he had turned away a beggar who was a king, but that the woman whose cottage the beggar had slept in was standing in the lane with her wrists lit up, and that the king was standing between her and the village he had controlled for 3 years, and that none of that was going to go the way he had imagined. Fen, for her part, had stopped at the lane's edge and was looking at the innkeeper with the calm, assessing patience I had come to recognize, the patience of someone who has named a thing clearly and is waiting to see whether the thing will change. It would change. I would make certain of it. By mid-morning I had sent a messenger up the garrison road. By noon, the accounting officer's arrival was confirmed for the following week. I spent the afternoon in the elder hall with the village elder and listened to his explanation without interrupting, and then told him quietly what it had failed to explain. Every family who had not received stores, every family who had received them twice, and the fact that I had spent the previous night on a river track in a cottage with 1 candle lit. He did not have an answer for that. Most men don't. I went back down the river track in the late afternoon. She had a pot on, and 2 cups on the table, and did not ask how it had gone. She poured, and sat, and said, "The Aldrich widow's woodstack will last the month." I moved what she had from the wet side to the dry. I sat across from her. The marks on our wrists were quiet now, still present, still faintly lit, but the urgency of the morning had settled into something steadier, something that knew it had time. "I will have to return to Ashenvorn," I said. "I know. The court will have a great deal to say." "I expect it will," she said. She looked at her cup. "I am not a court woman." "No," I said. "You are not." I looked at her. "You are a woman who goes out in the dark to bring firewood to a widow who will not ask." You are a woman who opened her door when 7 others closed theirs. You are a woman who told the truth about a village elder's ledger to a stranger she could not have known was the king, and who is going to tell it again when the accounting officer arrives, if I ask her to. She looked at me. Am I asking? I said. Yes, she said, simply. Then you will. I will. I looked at the cottage, the shelf of jars, the good boots by the door, the pallet she had slept on, the bed I had slept in, the wooden carving on the windowsill. I will come back, I said, after the accounting is done, and the stores are redistributed, and the elder hall has been set right. It will be 3 weeks, perhaps 4. Caldenmere will still be here, she said. And you? She looked at me with that particular calm that was hers and no one else's, the calm that had decided, and had nothing left to calculate, and was simply present. I will be here, she said. The groundskeeper's cloak was hanging on the hook by her door. I had worn it for 3 days. It was the shape of the whole test, wrinkled and damp and smelling of snow and wood smoke. I left it there. I did not need it anymore, and something about leaving it behind felt right, the way a thing feels right when it has served its purpose, and the next part of the story no longer requires it. I walked back up to the Garrison Road in my own bearing, without a limp, in the last of the afternoon light, and did not look back, because I did not need to. The bond mark on my wrist was steady and quiet, the way it had been all night in her cottage, and I understood now what my wolf had been waiting for across 5 years of patience. Not a ceremony, not a name, not a bloodline. A door that opened. A fire that was built before dawn, not because anyone was watching, but because there was an old woman down the lane who would need wood and would not ask for it. A month later, when I came back with a proper healer from Ashenvorn and a timber crew for the Aldrich widow's roof, and a new pack steward, whose ledger I had reviewed myself, the lane looked different. Not rebuilt, same village, same 14 houses, same cooperage. But the inn had its shutters open, and 2 children were building something in the lane out of sticks, and when they saw me coming they stopped, and watched with the easy curiosity of children who have not been taught to hide. She was at the river track door when I turned off the lane. She had known I was coming. The bond mark tells things when the distance is closing. And she had her cloak on and her herb bag at her side, because she had been planning to go to the Aldrich widows, and had decided she would go after, and was not going to let my arrival change her plans. I loved her for that. I understood, in that moment, that I had always been going to love her for that. That somewhere in the design of things, someone with a long view had arranged for a king who needed to learn the shape of his own territory, to walk down a river track in a borrowed cloak, and for a door at the end of it to be the one that opened. I held out my hand. She took it. The marks on our wrists blazed warm and gold for a moment, and then settled, the way a fire settles when the last log has found its place and the room is going to be warm all night. 3 weeks, she said. Almost 4. Almost 4, I said. I apologize. The Aldrich widow's roof, she said, looking past me at the timber crew coming down the lane. Yes. She looked at it for a moment with quiet satisfaction. Not triumph, just the look of someone seeing a thing she wanted to happen, happening. Then she looked at me. Come inside, she said. I built the fire up before you arrived. I followed her in. The groundskeeper's cloak was still on the hook by the door, exactly where I had left it. She had not moved it. I thought about asking why, and then I understood. It was a record. The shape of a night that had changed everything. She was not a woman who needed things explained to her twice, but she was a woman who remembered what mattered and kept it visible. I let it hang there. We sat by the fire, her on the bench, me in the chair I had taken that first morning when she poured the broth. Outside, the timber crew was at the Aldrich widow's roof, the proper healer was setting up in the elder hall, and the stores had found their correct houses at last. The lane was a real village again, not a lane in someone's arrangement. And in the cottage on the river track, the fire she had built was burning, and the marks on our wrists were quiet, with the specific quiet of things that have found what they were made for, and I was home in a way I had not been home in a long time. Not in the stone hall with its throne and its echoes, but here, with one candle and a jar shelf and a woman across from me who had given a stranger her bed because he was cold, and had not needed any other reason. The cloak hung on the hook, the fire did not go out. That was enough.